Hey guys, I'm here to show you a really quick deck profile of Dragonic Overlord the X. So let's get right into it. Starter, Red Pulse Dracokid, Counter Blast 1, shove in a soul, check top 5 for a grade 3, add it to your hand, pretty simple. So that's the starter. Next, I run 4 copies of Dragonic Overlord the X. Dragonic Overlord the X's skill is Legion, search for a copy of itself or the end. And its other ability is when it attacks and it doesn't hit, you counterblast 1, discard a copy of itself, and you choose 2 of your opponent's rear guards and retire them. So it adds pressure. So if it hits, you get to restand due to the end skill. If it doesn't hit, you get to retire 2 of the rear guards. So the mate, I use 3 copies of Dragonic Overlord the End. 3 copies because ideally you don't want to ride it. You want to use it as a mate. And at 3, I can still find it out for Legioning, Soul Blast it out, so 3 is enough for copies for the Legion skill and for the Persona Blast skill, so that's what I prefer. Personal choice. Breakride, Dragonic Overlord. Limit break, when you Breakride, and your Vanguard attacks a rear guard, counterblast 1, discard 1, it restands. So really nice when you combo it off with the cross. It can be a cross Breakride when you have no choice and you have to Breakride with the end, or if you want to, for fun, you can do that. And I just like it because it adds for an extra attack and it's Dragonic Overlord. So personal choice. If you don't want to run the Breakride, you can run an extra copy of Dragonic Overlord the Great. The Great skill is when it's in Legion, if it attacks a rear guard, counterblast 1, discard 2, restand it. So if you don't want to run the Breakride, you can just run 2 copies of this. For grade 2s, 2 copies of Dragon Knight Nehalem. I like Nehalem. I don't want to use Twilight Arrow because Twilight Arrow adds up to the counterblast for the deck. This deck does like to counterblast. Twilight Arrow is nice because it can pick off rear guards. I like Nehalem because I like to ride it. If I have Red Pulse as my booster, it still hits for 14. It's a 10k base, so I can block off those 14k attacks to my Vanguard. And it's Dragon Knight Nehalem. It's aesthetically appealing and for a Kagero deck. I like to use a lot of oldie cards in this deck. So next, we have our Overlord 12k attacker, Burning Horn Dragon. Reason I'm using Burning Horn at copies of 4 is because I like to poke my opponent, their Vanguard. A lot of times you don't have a lot of hand because everything you're calling is from your hand. So I like to call out 1 Burnout for an extra poke if I have to. So it's really nice. So I maximize my 12k attackers for this deck. Next for the grade 2s, 3 copies of Dragonic Burnout. It's a staple. Some people would run it at 4, which you might want to do. Reason I'm running it at 3, it's expensive. Other reason is I like it at 3. It tends to do its job pretty well. So its ability is you can Soul Blast 1, but first you have to pay the cost of choosing an Overlord from your drop zone, return it to the bottom of your deck, then Soul Blast. After paying that cost, you can pick one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. So nice Soul Blast 1 retire with an Overlord cost. Another reason why I'm running 9 Overlords. Last for the grade 2s, Dragonic Neoflame. It's the mate for the Great. Only run 2 copies because I only have 1 copy of the Great, and I don't use its skill very often, running 2, so I can find the mate very easy if I have to ride the Great. Last for grade 1s, 3 Dragon Monk Gojo. Gojo's skill, you rest it, discard 1, draw from your deck. Really nice when you ride it, put it at rest, dump and draw. You can use it for dumping and discarding Overlords for burnout skills, or when you want to put stuff back into your deck for Legion, it's great. So Gojo's my go-to ride. Next for grade 1s, 3 copies of Lava Foe Dragon. I only run 3 instead of 4 because I run 9 grade 3s, so I have enough stride fodder in the deck. And I like to make room for the other grade 1s in my deck, so stride centric, stride fodder. Next, 3 copies of Calamity Tahr Wyvern. I run 3 because I do like to re-ride the X and Soul Blast out the other VX and VN for re-legioning and adding stuff back to my hand. I also like the extra draws. I like to put Red Pulse into my Soul when I ride my grade 2, and then still be able to Soul Blast 2 and draw early game, so 3 seems to be a nice number for me. Lastly, 4 Protect Orb Dragon, Perfect Guards. G Perfect Guards, when you Perfect Guard your Vanguard, it can't be hit, and if you have a copy of itself in drop zone, unflip one. So this deck likes to counterblast, so I like to unflip. Next, I'm running 4 copies of Embodiment of Spirit Tahr. Aesthetic, it's a Tahr, you know, Kagero. More critical aesthetic, 2 copies of Blu-ray Dracokid. So I'm running 6 crit, 6 draw in this deck. So for my draws, 4 copies of Gattling Dragon, best trigger in the game. Combos 1, move it to the soul, pick off their grade 0, retire it. So early game you pick off their starter to minimize the combos they can do later in the game. And lastly, for my grade 2s, 2 Artpique. Running Artpique because you can move to soul, give something else +3, and it builds up soul for Calamity, Tahr, and Burnout. And the reason I'm running 6 draw, 6 crit is because all these overlords like to discard cards from your hand for the restanding abilities, and the more cards you have in your hand for discarding, even if you want to discard your draw triggers because they only have the 5k shield, it helps out. So I really like the 6 draw, 6 crit. It helps. It's very consistent. Lastly, 4 Dragon Monk Genjo. Heal triggers. Old school. Old heal triggers. I like it. So now we're moving on to the G zone. 2 copies. Divine Dragonite Mahmud. It's when an attack hits, pick one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it. Next, I'm running 2 copies of Divine Dragon Knight Mustafa, which is counterblast 1, flip over a card in your G zone, retire one of your opponent's rear guards, and for each copy of itself in the G zone, you can pick one of your units and you can give it an unflip on hit ability. So I like to use 2 because if my opponent has a rear guard that I just guaranteed want to kill, I can just stride into Mustafa, flip over itself, or flip over Mahmud for the guaranteed retire. Next, 2 copies of Root Flare Dragon. Root Flare because flip over itself. What it does is if you have 2 or more cards in your G zone, and you flip itself over in your G zone, you can pick one of your opponent's rear guards in and retire everything in the column as that rear guard. So if you pick a rear guard that's at the same column as another rear guard that has resist, and you pick the one that doesn't have resist, you can still retire the column even if the other rear guard does have resist, which is very nice. So using Root Flare to mow down the columns. Lastly, I use 2 copies of Dragonic Overlord the X. The Ace is the finisher. I don't like to use it more than once because of its Counterblast 2 cost. So its skill is Counterblast 2, flip over a copy of itself. If you have 2 or more cards in your G zone, this card gets drive check -1, so you only have 2 in drive. And its ability is after it attacks the Vanguard, you discard 2 cards. 1 has to have Overlord in its name, and you can restand this with +5. So it's a restander and it can finish off your opponent if they're at 4 or 5 damage, typically when they're at 5 damage. So that's the deck. Hope you guys enjoyed, and like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you guys soon for more content.